Hey everyone, so this month I've read a total of 9 books, and this is a bit more than what I usually read in a month, but that's just because, girl, I had an incredible amount of free time, so I spent a lot of it reading, and I have lots of thoughts and feelings, so I thought maybe I would share them, just in case someone really cares. So yeah, anyways, without further ado, here are my thoughts and feelings on the books that I read this month. Alright, so the first book that I read this month was Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. This book follows a middle school boy who's getting really horribly bullied because of his lazy eye, and he starts to form a friendship with his female classmate named Kojima because she's also getting bullied. And they start off by just exchanging letters, but eventually they talk in person and then they share deep stuff between each other, and it's really sweet, kind of bittersweet. It makes you wonder, like, are they really friends just because, like, are they friends so that they can share pain, or is it because that they share pain that they are friends? Really well written, concise book. It's under 200 pages. I will say though that the depictions of bullying in this are pretty raw and vivid, so it's kind of disturbing to read, but I think that that vulnerability is necessary in being realistic. Anyways, a lot of great conversations and discussions on adolescence, on violence, and on friendship. I would give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This next book is Funny Story by Emily Henry, and girl, it was so good! It follows this girl named Daphne and this guy named Miles, and basically what happens is they, like, their exes dump them for each other. So like Daphne's ex, they were engaged, dumped her for Miles's ex-girlfriend at the time. You know what I mean? But they end up having to live together because of the situation, and at first they kind of, not that they don't get along, but they just don't have anything in common, so they're kind of just like awkward. But then they start to form a friendship, and then on the back of the book it kind of makes it seem like it's a fake dating thing because they say they're gonna pretend to date on social media to like rile up their exes. But honestly, there wasn't that too much of that. I feel like it was more friendship to lovers than like fake dating to lovers, if that makes sense. But it's so nice. And one thing that I really loved was how well these characters were developed. Daphne, for example, she has a lot of really interesting qualities, and one thing I really admire about Daphne is her dedication to her job. She is a children's librarian, and let me tell you, girl, she loves it, and it's so sweet to hear about her, like, talking about her job and stuff. Miles is a super friendly guy, knows everybody in town, and because he loves this small town that they live in so much, he convinces Daphne to stay, basically, because she's considering moving out so she doesn't have to be in the same town as her ex. This isn't too big of a spoiler, I think, but he's kind of like, no, if he's the reason why you came to this town, he shouldn't be the reason why you moved. Like, you should show him that you can make more out of this town than just him. And so she's like, but how? And he's like, well, I'll show you all the charms of this town. And so he brings her to like various places, various local businesses, and it's so sweet. It's so sweet. You'll have to read it yourself to find out how sweet it is. It was a pretty cute romance. I really liked it. Yeah. Okay, the next book that I read was When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, and I picked up this book because Nadine from Singles Inferno 2 said that it was her favorite book, and I was like, girl, put me on that. This was a really good book, not to any surprise. It's about a neurosurgical resident who finds out that he has an inoperable type of lung cancer, and this book details his journey just growing up in general, his medical journey, and of course his journey battling cancer and becoming a father. And girl, let me tell you, it's just awesome. Or one thing that I really admired about him was the reason why he decided to even study medicine, because in the beginning he didn't have any passion for medicine. What he really loved was literature, and he had such a hunger for knowledge, and specifically he had a hunger for understanding death and life. And I think there's a point where he said something like this, where he was like, no matter how much I theorize and discuss about life and death, I won't truly understand it until I'm face to face, like grappling with it. And that is the reason, ultimately, that is the reason why he pursued a career in medicine. And I just thought, wow, that type of ambition is really awesome. Another thing about him and his writing style is that he doesn't try to be overly like self-pitying or dramatic. He's just raw and vulnerable and honest. And I feel like that is what makes his story all the more heartbreaking. There's some things that he points out that you're like, oh my gosh, I would never even think about that, but now that you point it out, like, that's really sad. For example, when he's spending what he presumes to be his last days on Earth, he has to decide, like, what do I want to do? Do I want to keep working my butt off as a neurosurgical resident until I can graduate, or should I settle down and just do research and write this book, or should I focus on becoming a father? And it's just like, when you have such little time left but so many ambitions, I can't imagine like how difficult it is to traverse that kind of journey, you know? But he depicts it so well and so beautifully. I gave this book 5 stars. Okay, so the next book that I read was Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung. And this book is a collection of short stories that are like horror stories, sci-fi, thriller, stuff of that kind. And it's so good. Honestly, the pages flip themselves because each story is only like 20-ish pages long. So as soon as you're done with one story, you're just like, girl, I want more. And because I have a short attention span, it just kept me entertained all the time because there was always a change in pace. I was not planning on buying this book at all when I went to the bookstore, but when I started reading the first few pages of the head, I was like, I need to take this book home with me. I wish I could say more about this, but I know that if I start talking about one short story, I'm just gonna like have to talk about all of them because they're so good. I gave this a 5 stars. Alright, so the next book that I read was Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. And wow, this was a good book. This was a good book. I was searching for friends to lovers recommendations, and this was like the most recommended one, and I can see why. It's about this girl named Macy, and her mom passes away but leaves a list of things for her father to do for Macy so that Macy can still feel her mom's presence. And one of the items on that list is getting like a getaway home, so that whenever Macy is stressed, she can like relax. And so her dad does that and buys her a summer vacation home. At this summer house, she meets this boy named Elliot, and they become really great friends, and they share love for books, and they just nerd out together in her little home library every single time she's at that weekend house. But then as they become friends, something huge happens that causes them to like not talk again, and then you also see the perspective of them meeting after like 10 years of no contact. And it's told in alternating timelines, which I think is really cool. So the then timeline is the timeline where they first meet as kids and where they go from strangers to friends to best friends, and the now timeline where they start talking to each other again after 10 years, they reconnect, and you get kind of like an old flame romance trope. There's a situation that's discussed in this book. I feel like it wasn't given the respect that it deserved, and it's such a shame because if that situation had been written slightly differently, I would have totally given this a 5 stars. If you want to know more, go to my Goodreads. But yeah, still a really great book. I would give this like a 4.75 stars. The next book that I read was Caraval by Stephanie Garber. And not gonna lie, I didn't like this book as much as I thought I would. I had a couple of friends recommended it to me, and then I also saw a lot of great things about it online. So I was expecting to really like this book. But anyways, it's about these 2 sisters named Scarlett and Donatella, and it's narrated in the point of view of Scarlett, and they're invited to go to the Caraval that is hosted by the Master Legend, who will grant anybody one wish if they win. And let's talk about what I liked about this book first. I think the pacing was really good. I think it's a page turner. Even when I was like annoyed at the book and not enjoying it, I was like, I want to know what happens next, so I kept reading. Plot was really good. It was unpredictable, it kept me on my toes, and you can envision how things are supposed to look super easily, and I feel like you are like being transported into this magical carnival world. So I want to give Stephanie Garber props for that. I did not like, though, the main character Scarlett. I feel like she was a little bit annoying and contradicting. I felt like she kept trusting the people who she shouldn't trust, and she kept not trusting the people who she should trust, aka the love interest. I felt like the plot was decided, and then the author tried to write Scarlett's decisions to fit the plot that she had in mind, as opposed to making the characters' decisions drive the plot itself, you know? And I also felt like the tension between her and the love interest was just totally unnatural. she kept like trying to dislike him for whatever reason, but in my opinion, he was so nice to her, and he was the only character in the book who was like actually being helpful to her. So I just kind of got annoyed at her for that. And I get it, like, protagonists don't have to be perfect, so I do think I'm gonna try to read the next 2 books. I'm trying to try to complete this trilogy because maybe she will redeem herself and then I'll really like her then. This did end on an awesome cliffhanger, so I kind of do want to know what happens next. The next book that I read was After Dark by Haruki Murakami, and this is a reread for me because I think I read this in middle school, but I forgot all about it and I needed a book, but I had no money, so this is a book that kind of details what happens after dark, hence the title, and it follows these 3 characters: Mari, who is just wandering around in the middle of the night, Eri, her sister, who's just sleeping in a room for basically the entire time, and this guy named Shirakawa, who is entangled in their lives in a completely different, more complicated way. In my opinion, I only found Mari's chapters worth reading. I felt like Eri's chapters were super redundant and boring, and Shirakawa's chapters were fine, but just not as exciting as Mari's. I felt like the selling point of this book wasn't the plot, but more so the writing style. It's written in 4th person, so it uses like we pronouns. It's like, we see this, and then we see that, and because of that, it feels super duper cinematic. Quite literally, Haruki Murakami is describing like frame by frame what you're seeing. He's like, then your point of view shifts 90 degrees, and now you're seeing the top of, and so because of that, it feels cinematic, and that gives it its own flair. And while I do think that it's a little too redundant for its own good, because like, we got 50 pages of literally just him describing someone sleeping. Even though it's a bit redundant, I see what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to be like, no matter how much you perceive, you will never truly know what's going on. Because he really does write what you perceive in immense detail, but there's always some lingering aspect of absurdity, like a mirror reflection lingering for longer than it should. Like the person leaves, but their reflection remains. So there's always something a little weird going on that you aren't ever given an explanation to why, and I think that's the point. Overall, 3.5 stars is what I gave it. Yeah. The next book that I read was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And this book follows a girl named Esther Greenwood who is working at an internship at a magazine in the summer in New York. And she doesn't quite enjoy it as much as she wished she would, and when she comes back home, she finds herself pretty depressed and mentally ill, and thus she gets sent to various medical institutions. I can totally see why this is a modern classic. It's super fresh despite being written in the 1950s, 1960s. The voice of a young girl is so vivid in this. You can tell that a woman wrote this, and I found myself hugely relating to a lot of the things that this character was thinking, and I also found myself really amazed at the prose. It's almost, I want to say, hauntingly beautiful. It's disturbing, but it's vivid and real and vulnerable, and I honestly think that you could take like several like quotes and passages from this book and read them as individual poems, because that's just how beautiful it is. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy this book as much as I thought I would. It was just super duper highly regarded as an amazing work of feminist literature, but Esther Greenwood, and she's known to be like a self-insert Sylvia Plath, she's just like incredibly racist. And I get it, this was written in the 1950s, 1960s by a white woman. I'm not expecting it to reflect all of the progressive ideas that we have at this day and age, right? But I did find it a little problematic that this was considered a feminist work of literature and that it was shining light on the issues and struggles that women face while simultaneously looking down on women of color. I feel like you can't be racist and like feminist at once. Like, being feminist means you want to stand for all women, not just white women. And if I had to rate this book based off of how well written it was and how beautiful it was, I would give it like a 4.5, or not even that, a 5. I would give it a 5. But if I had to rate this on how much I enjoyed it, I would say a 3, just because I couldn't get with how contradicting the message was. Alright, so at this point in the month, I'm kind of in like a reading slump. The past couple books I've read weren't so great, disappointed, don't want to read anything, and I was like, maybe I should just stop reading for a week or something so that I can start the next month fresh. But luckily, this book came to the rescue because, girl, it was so damn good. It's about these 40 women who live in an underground bunker cage thing, and they are just heavily guarded by guards the entire time, and they live by very strict rules. They can't touch each other, they can't try to kill themselves, they can only like eat the food that they're provided, and they have to poo in the middle of the room while all the other women are watching. And it's narrated in the perspective of the youngest girl in that bunker, and unlike the other woman, the narrator has absolutely zero recollection of her life before living in the bunker, but these other women do remember their lives before. They lived lives as typists, nurses, housewives, etc. And their memory kind of gets foggy when it comes to how they even ended up in that bunker, but they still are able to mourn the loss of a normal life, while this narrator isn't. So she feels kind of ostracized from this group. But eventually she realizes that the women don't hate her or anything like that. I feel like they're also relearning / teaching the youngest narrator how to be human again. They teach her things about friendship, compassion, how to make meaning out of time, and the joys of pooping in physical solitude. Like, that's crazy. Like, since they couldn't poo by themselves in the bunker, in the underground cave, the narrator thinks it's normal. And so she's like, is the only thing that separates us from being animals the ability to poo alone? Like, I feel like that's a pretty weak link to humanity, guys. But eventually, later on in the story, she does get to experience physical solitude, and she's like, wow, this is awesome. I'm just like, wow, that's something I would never think about. Also really makes us question how much of humanity is intrinsic and how much of it is left after everything is stripped away. And I think the answer that we discover through reading this book is a lot. Let me just read this quote because it's so good. I was forced to acknowledge much too late that I too had loved, that I was capable of suffering, and that I was human after all. What a quote in the first 3 pages! One could say that there are a couple of, like, I guess, plot holes or unanswered questions. Like, you never find out how the women get into that bunker. You never really find out where they are exactly. You never find out why. But despite not ever figuring out why the circumstances are as they are, I feel like it's less about that and more about what the characters choose to do, or how the characters choose to live in spite of these circumstances that strip them of their humanity. Really great discussions on, again, being human, great discussions on being woman, and just absolutely great book. I would recommend it to anybody. I think anybody can enjoy it because it's just so wonderful. All right, so that wraps up my thoughts and feelings on the 9 books that I read this month. I had an incredible time yapping. I had an amazing time talking to myself. So I hope you guys enjoyed too. If you did, go ahead and make sure to like and subscribe. Okay, anyways, bye-bye, toodaloo.